The dust motes danced in the slivers of waning sunlight, a macabre ballet in the cavernous halls of Blackwood Manor. Ilara, the new maid, watched them, her thin frame swallowed by the faded grandeur of the place. She'd taken the position out of desperation, a last-ditch attempt to escape the squalor of the city, but the isolation here, the oppressive silence, already felt like a tightening noose. Mrs. Ainsworth, the gaunt, elderly housekeeper, had given her a curt tour, her eyes like chips of obsidian, reflecting nothing. "Your duties are simple," she'd rasped, her voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "Clean, cook, and attend to the house." "Attend to the house?" Ilara had asked, a flicker of unease in her voice. Mrs. Ainsworth had merely stared, her lips a thin, bloodless line. "Just attend." The first night was a symphony of creaks and whispers. The wind, a mournful wail, seemed to carry voices, faint and indistinct, through the drafty corridors. Ilara, huddled beneath the threadbare blankets in her small, austere room, told herself it was just the old house settling. But the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes tracing her every move, persisted. The next morning she found a small porcelain doll on her pillow. It was a grotesque thing, its painted eyes wide and staring, its porcelain skin cracked and discolored. Ilara recoiled, a shiver running down her spine. She had no recollection of it being there. She found Mrs. Ainsworth in the kitchen, her back ramrod straight as she stirred a pot of something thick and unappetizing. "Mrs. Ainsworth," Ilara began, holding out the doll. "This was on my bed." The old woman didn't turn. "It's nothing," she said, her voice flat. "Just a relic." "A relic?" Ilara repeated, her voice trembling. "The house, it holds on to things," Mrs. Ainsworth said, finally turning, her eyes locking onto Ilara's. "Things best left undisturbed." Ilara tried to dismiss her words, but the doll, its cold, lifeless eyes, haunted her. She hid it in the bottom of her drawer, but the feeling of its presence lingered, a cold spot in the warmth of her room. As the days passed, the house seemed to grow darker, more oppressive. The shadows lengthened, stretching like grasping claws. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, sometimes sounding like her own name being called. A breathy, chilling sound. She began to find strange symbols etched into the dust on the furniture, intricate patterns that seemed to writhe and shift in her peripheral vision. The food she cooked tasted metallic, acrid, and the air, always thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, began to carry a faint, sickly sweetness, like rotting flowers. One evening, while cleaning the library, she found a hidden door behind a bookshelf. It led to a narrow spiral staircase that descended into the darkness. Curiosity and a growing sense of dread compelled her to explore. The staircase led to a damp, stone cellar, the air thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something metallic and sharp. In the center of the cellar, on a stone altar, lay a collection of objects: the porcelain doll, its eyes now glowing with a faint, eerie light, a tarnished silver mirror, its surface cracked and distorted, and a small, leather-bound book, its pages filled with strange, indecipherable symbols. As Ilara reached for the book, a cold gust of wind swept through the cellar, extinguishing the flickering candle she held. The darkness was absolute, heavy and suffocating. Then she heard it. A soft, rustling sound, like the dragging of cloth, followed by a low, guttural moan. Panic seized her. She stumbled backward, her heart pounding against her ribs. She fumbled for the candle, her fingers trembling. As she relit it, she saw it. A figure, tall and gaunt, standing in the shadows, its face obscured by a veil of darkness. It moved with an unnatural grace, its limbs twisting and contorting in impossible ways. Ilara screamed, a raw, primal sound that echoed through the cellar. The figure lunged, its hand outstretched, its fingers long and skeletal. She turned and fled, scrambling up the stairs, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She burst into the library, slamming the hidden door shut, her body shaking with terror. She had to get out. She had to leave this place. She ran to her room, throwing her meager belongings into a bag. As she turned to leave, she saw it. The porcelain doll, sitting on her bed, its eyes glowing brighter than before, its head tilted as if watching her. A voice, cold and rasping, filled the room. "You cannot leave," it whispered, the sound seeming to come from the doll itself. "You belong here." Elara screamed again, her voice hoarse with terror. She grabbed the doll and threw it against the wall, shattering it into pieces. But even as it shattered, the eyes, glowing fragments of porcelain, remained, staring at her from the floor. She fled the room, running through the dark corridors, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She reached the main hall, her hand trembling as she fumbled with the heavy front door. As she pulled the door open, a gust of wind slammed it shut, the force of it throwing her against the wall. The house seemed to vibrate, to come alive, its walls groaning and shifting. She turned, her eyes wide with terror, and saw them. Figures emerging from the shadows, their forms indistinct, their faces hidden. They moved with an unnatural, gliding motion, their hands outstretched, their fingers long and skeletal. Mrs. Ainsworth stood at the front of the group, her eyes glowing with an eerie light. "You have disturbed the slumber of the house," she said, her voice a low, guttural growl. "Now, you will join us." The figures closed in, their hands reaching for her. Elara screamed, her voice lost in the cacophony of whispers and moans that filled the hall. She felt their cold, skeletal fingers grasp her arms, their touch like ice against her skin. They dragged her down the hall, towards the cellar, towards the darkness that awaited her. The next morning, the sun rose, casting long, pale shadows across the grounds of Blackwood Manor. A new maid arrived, her eyes wide with hope, her heart filled with a desperate need for escape. Mrs. Ainsworth greeted her at the door, her eyes like chips of obsidian. "Your duties are simple," she rasped, her voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "Clean, cook, and attend to the house." The new maid nodded, her eyes fixed on the ground. She felt a strange unease, a sense of dread that settled in her stomach. As she entered the hall, she noticed a small porcelain doll lying in the corner, its eyes staring up at her, glowing with a faint, eerie light. She shuddered, a cold shiver running down her spine. The house held on to things. It held on to its secrets, its darkness, and its victims. And it waited, patiently, for its next maid. The house was always hungry and would never be satiated. The house always needed to be attended to. And the house would never be alone. It began with an ad in the newspaper. "Housemaid wanted. Room and board included. Excellent pay. Call 555-0193. It seemed like the perfect opportunity for Elena. She had recently lost her job and was struggling to make ends meet. With nowhere else to go, she eagerly dialed the number. A woman with a raspy voice answered, giving her an address and instructing her to come immediately if she was interested. The house stood at the end of a long, winding road, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to whisper in the wind. It was an old mansion, its paint peeling, its windows dark. Despite its decay, something about it felt inviting, almost pulling Elena in. The door creaked open before she could knock, revealing a thin, elderly woman dressed in a long black dress. Her gray hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her pale blue eyes studied Elena intently. "You must be the new maid," the woman said. "Come in." Elena hesitated, but the woman turned and disappeared into the house, leaving the door ajar. Gathering her courage, she stepped inside. The house was eerily quiet. The wallpaper was peeling, the chandeliers covered in dust, and the air carried a musty scent. The woman led Elena through the dimly lit corridors, her footsteps echoing. "You will clean, cook, and keep to yourself. No questions, no wandering. Understood?" Elena nodded. "Good. My name is Mrs. Whitmore. You may call me Madam." She led Elena to a small room in the attic. It contained only a narrow bed, a wardrobe, and a small window overlooking the twisted trees. "This will be your room. Start in the morning. Dinner is at 7. Do not be late." And with that, Mrs. Whitmore left, locking the door behind her. The first night was restless. The wind howled through the cracks, and strange creaks echoed in the hallway outside. Something about the house unsettled Elena, but exhaustion took over, and she eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep. Morning came with an eerie stillness. Elena dressed quickly and started her chores, dusting the ancient furniture, sweeping the long corridors, and scrubbing the floors. She saw no one except Mrs. Whitmore, who watched her closely but said little. By evening, Elena was exhausted. She arrived in the grand dining room at exactly 7, where Mrs. Whitmore sat at the head of the long wooden table. The meal was sparse, a thin soup and dry bread. As they ate in silence, Elena couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, though they were alone. Later that night, as she lay in bed, she heard whispers outside her door, faint and unintelligible. She sat up, heart pounding. The whispers grew louder, then stopped abruptly. Footsteps creaked down the hallway, fading into silence. Elena barely slept. Days passed, each one blending into the next. The house seemed alive in a way she couldn't explain. Shadows moved when she wasn't looking. Whispers followed her. She sometimes glimpsed figures in the corner of her eye, but when she turned, nothing was there. One evening, while dusting in the library, she found a locked door at the end of the corridor. Unlike the rest of the house, which was neglected, this door was pristine, its brass handle polished. Curious, she reached for it. "Do not touch that door." Elena spun around to find Mrs. Whitmore watching her, eyes burning with warning. "Never. Go. Inside." Elena swallowed hard and nodded. But that night the whispers returned, louder this time, and among them one stood out. "Help us." Sleep was impossible. The more she tried to ignore the strange happenings, the worse they became. Objects moved on their own. Shadows loomed in the corners, and always, the whispers called to her. One night she could take no more. With trembling hands, she crept down the hall to the forbidden door. She pressed her ear against it. Silence. Then, a soft knock, as if someone inside had been waiting. Her breath hitched. She hesitated only a moment before turning the handle. The door swung open, revealing darkness. The air was thick with the scent of decay. She stepped inside, her heart hammering. A single candle flickered on a table, and in its dim glow, she saw them. Corpses. Lined against the walls, their faces frozen in silent screams. Their skin stretched tightly over their bones, their hands clawing at the air. And in the center of the room, a mirror, its surface black as the void, whispering her name. Elena turned to flee, but the door slammed shut. A presence loomed behind her. Cold fingers brushed her shoulder. "You shouldn't have come." A sharp pain struck her chest. Darkness swallowed her whole. The next morning, Mrs. Whitmore placed a fresh ad in the newspaper. "Housemaid wanted. Room and board included. Excellent pay. Call 5550193.